I am outstanding in what is reported to be the site of the world's first fast food hamburger chain known as White Castle. The White Castle Corporation has commemorated this site as the very first White Castle location. But was it really the first? I found some confusing information about the early White Castle locations. I've done some digging. Let's take a closer look. White Castle is said to have been founded in 1921 by Billy Ingram and a native Kansan, Walter Anderson. But Walt, known as the King of Hamburger, had 3 burger stands up and running before he joined forces with Billy Ingram. Born November 26, 1880, Walter Anderson made the migration south to Wichita from his hometown, the rural St. Mary's, Kansas. A short order cook by trade, among other things, Walt struck out on his own and purchased a shoe repair stand made from an old streetcar, and at this location, 10 days before his 36th birthday, opened his first burger stand on November 16, 1916. This first venture into the business was located at the corner of Douglas and Meade in Wichita, Kansas. Out of the 4 corners of this intersection, I believe Walt's first burger stand was in this empty lot right here. That small portable streetcar would fit nicely right next to this building, and yes, this was an empty lot back in 1916. The building right here next to Walt's Streetcar Diner will come back into Walt's life several years later. Walt's next place after the converted streetcar was a couple blocks to the east at 1024 East Douglas at the corner of Douglas and Wabash. Take a look at this photo and notice 2 things. First, it says store number 1 at the top. You can also see the address of 1024. Shouldn't this be the very first location of the very first White Castle? Now, 5 years after having a total of 3 locations up and running, Walt met Billy. Billy liked Walt's unique, booming burger business, and they opened their first place together. And so on March 10th, 1921, White Castle No. 4 opened here at 110 West 1st Street on the corner of 1st and Main in Wichita. So why is store number 4 considered the first by the White Castle Corporation? Let's go back and cover the first several White Castles, all of which were in Wichita. White Castle No. 1 was located here at 1024 East Douglas, or on the corner of Douglas and Wabash. White Castle No. 2 was at 111 East 2nd Street. White Castle No. 3 was at 215 East William Street. And when Walt formed his partnership with Billy on March 10, 1921, they opened their first store together at 110 West 1st. This was White Castle No. 4. White Castle No. 5 was at 112 South St. Francis. White Castle No. 6 was at 146 North Emporia. White Castle 7 was at 119 South Water. And White Castle No. 8 was at Patty and Douglas. Back during those early years, Walt became quite a local royal figure. In 1920, during Walt's early and rapid success, he built this house for $12,000. It was said to be an imposing palace with a commanding view of the east. This estate sat about right here at 455 South Hillside, very close to Kellogg Avenue in Wichita. White Castle's success was largely due to Walt's ingenuity and creative short-order cooking methods. On May 27, 1928, Walt and Billy opened a test kitchen, the White Castle Systems Food Experiment Department at 800 East Douglas, right next to the lot where Walt's first streetcar hamburger stand was 12 years earlier. In this photo, you can see where they cleverly painted a contour of the White Castle on the brick siding. If we take a close look today, you can still see some of that white paint residue over 90 years later. This unique White Castle location was open to serve regular customers, but these test food variations were sold at a discount, I suppose, if you were brave enough. In 1933, some 17 years after the White Castle partnership began, Walt sold his share of the business to his partner, Billy Ingram. At that time, there were more than 116 White Castles in at least 11 different states. Another interesting conundrum is the way the locations were numbered back then. Let's take a look. Here's a photo from 1924 labeled on the front of the building as White Castle Systems Inc. No. 2, It is in Omaha, Nebraska. Here's another location number 2 in Louisville, Kentucky. This one is from Indianapolis, Indiana. And this White Castle number 2 was located in the front of an immense and strange rock formation right in the middle of downtown Kansas City. Sometime later, this old concrete block version was torn down and rebuilt to the newer White Castle look without the crenellations and turret on the roof. As it turns out, the number painted on the front exterior of each location was the order designation for that particular state. And believe it or not, that old number 2 location in Kansas City, Missouri is still standing. Today, White Castle has more than 400 restaurants, although none of those are in Wichita. Another big question, why no stores in Kansas? Billy's descendants still control the company. Every store is corporately owned. The owners strive to maintain close control, and almost no store is very far from Ohio. And back to our first big question, why is store number 4 considered the first and original? It turns out those first 3 locations that predated Billy Ingram's involvement were not originally branded as White Castle. Billy was the one who came up with the White Castle name, and after they opened their first location together, location number 4, Walt went back and rebranded the other 3 locations as White Castle 1, 2, and 3, but were not included in the partnership. They were owned outright by Walt. In fact, here is store number 2 before the rebrand. Only Walt's name appeared on the front, no crenellations or turret on the roof, and no mention of White Castle on the front of the building. So that's why store number 4 is the first White Castle location. Confusing? Yes, but now we know. After retirement, Walt spent his days in Wichita and was laid to rest here at Old Mission Mausoleum. He died on December 13, 1963, at the age of 88. And 3 years later, on May 20th, 1966, Edgar Waldo Billy Ingram passed away at 85 and was also laid to rest at the very same mausoleum in Wichita, spending eternity just down the hall from his business partner and dear friend.